Hello and welcome to another episode of NFI Hammer, where a beginner attempts all things Warhammer. In this episode, I will be painting a Necron Chronomancer. I'm very excited about this unit. It retails for around $60 or Australian dollars at Games Workshop, but you can pick it up for just $20 in Imperium issue 41. I did a whole video about how this is like a great way to get models for cheap. Check it out if you're interested. The magazine's pretty good. It's not super exciting. It's got a lot of lore and pictures in it. The actual model itself was a lot of fun to put together. What I noticed about this one is there's a lot of customization around which head you want to use, what weapon you want to use, and I really haven't seen that a lot with Necrons, but I know for other things like Ultramarines it's very common. There was some fiddly pieces where you had to make sure that you didn't break anything, but other than that it was pretty straightforward. I've also been doing this technique where I'm not gluing them all together, so in this one I've kept the heads separate just so that it's kind of easier to paint and you don't have to kind of work around it as much. Before we dive into the actual model, I thought I'd take a couple of seconds to kind of see what it does on 10th edition, which has just come out, and see how it kind of stacks up on the tabletop. So one thing is cool is that it has this time splinter mantle where you can subtract 1 from each hit roll on the unit. I'm assuming because he's kind of bending the laws of time that it makes the unit harder to hit. I completely forgot about this roll when I used him on my second game ever of Warhammer, but it's pretty awesome. And then he's got this really unique ability, Chronometron, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, where after your unit has finished shooting, you can actually move another 5 inches. So you can take your unit back under cover, or you can move onto an objective. So it seems pretty cool. He can also be attached to any unit that's being led by a Royal Warden or a Noble. And I'm just saying this as a tip for other people because I didn't know myself, but characters like Overlord and a Lord are a noble type. I thought there was like this old Necron unit called a noble, and I didn't realize it was kind of a generic key term for a group of different leaders. So you can actually attach this guy with an overlord, which I had no idea until I was putting this video together. So very powerful, seems like a good addition to any army. What I'm doing is I bought this Warpstone Glow color because I realized my mood green was a bit too bright, and I wanted to try this technique where I painted in the grooves and the symbols and glyphs in the uniform with this dark green color, and then when I try and paint over the top, I'll try and leave the green in the recesses visible. It wasn't a complete success, but it kind of worked. Yeah, I don't know if there's a better way of doing it. Let me know in the comments below if there is. I'm also trying something different. Usually gold is the last step, but I'm using this Retributor armor as one of the first steps to paint the mantle that he's wearing. And I just felt like because it was such a prominent color that, I might as well try and do it and get it out of the way. Did kind of regret this later because I did get some paint on it from some of the other areas and I had to touch up. But overall, I think it looked pretty cool, and I can see that the model's already shaping together. Because you may have noticed that I used a flat white primer to prime the model, I'm now having to go over the black areas with the Batten Black. If you've watched any of my previous videos, recommend check them out if it's sort of your thing, but I've been priming the Necrons in black, so I've never actually had to do this step before. So it's a bit unusual to kind of just target the dark areas, but it was good. It was different. I think the white paint really highlights areas that you've missed, whereas with the black you can kind of easy for the eye to ignore it. So it kind of forces you to paint every, square millimeter of the unit. The next color was a Runelord Brass, so this is just your Necron bread and butter color for this painting the dynasty scheme that I'm painting. Interestingly, this unit does not have a lot of brass colors, so this was actually a very quick thing, but normally in the Necrons, this one is usually a longer step. I also thought of doing the staff and the orb red to kind of give it a really distinct color. It's also the box art color, so it's not a NFI Hammer original thought, but I thought that it might help kind of make the model really stand out on the battlefield. So again, I tried to just get the paint on the orb and not anywhere else, but I didn't really manage very well. Then for the actual staff tip or area where the orb's attached, I'm using this Mr. Hobby green paint just to give it a different color of green. I did find this paint was really hard to work with. I think it's acrylic or something, I'm not sure, but it definitely has a different texture and a different stickiness, and I didn't really enjoy working with it. Then it's the normal Leadbelcher that I use for the metallic colors, for the tentacles at the bottom, as well as sort of the joining segments of the body. I did notice with the white spray paint that it is a very bright silver, so I'll need to come back later and try and tone it down a bit, because it does look a bit plasticky on the first cover. It was also a bit tricky to get all the grooves and everything painted into the tentacles. Not sure if it would make more sense to paint them before they've kind of glued it together, or yeah, but it was a little bit tricky. It's probably one of the more finicky parts. Then I'm using my Mr. Hobby metallic blue-green, so this is one of my favorite accidental colors that I've discovered. It really creates kind of a mystical, futuristic scientific property, so I'm painting the little squares around the globe with this color, as well as the floating cubes in the mantle headpiece. But yeah, I really love it, and I was trying to also let some of the Warpstone green from the recesses shine through, but I found it was quite difficult with this paint. One thing I noticed was that the mantle was still a lot of gold, so I wanted something to kind of break it up. Some of my other Necron models I've used blue and red gemstones to ornate the cloaks and capes and whatnot that they're wearing. So with this one I thought I would use Necrog blue to paint the little balls in the things as gemstones. I went with this and not red because the red's already used in the orb, so I thought it would be too much red and might be a bit visually confusing, whereas blue isn't really used in anything other than the metallic blue-green. I also realized that I had not painted the beveled sigils on the Necron chest, as well as the front and back of the staff, so I went and did that, and then I also used this as an opportunity to touch up any of the areas that I had messed up on the gold headdress. Now it's time to paint the head. So I'm just using the normal moot green that I use to paint the eye that I've painted on all my Necron units. As I said before, you get a bit of customization around which heads to use, so I thought this one was kind of interesting and different compared to any of the other Necrons I use, so I picked that, but there is more normal Necron heads if you prefer. He also has this chin section, so I thought I would try and paint that green and then paint over it with white, just so that the crevice is glowing green, similar to the idea in the ornate headdress. It didn't really work, but it was an attempt. I'm also using Leadbelcher as well to paint the skull. It didn't really get spray painted properly with the primer. It also narrows in the white paint to kind of just a smaller section of the head, which I think gives it a bit more of a dynamic look rather than the whole thing being white. I realized that the white spray paint primer isn't fully even and didn't have full coverage, so I just went over it with Corax White, but I don't think I had cleaned my brush properly, and it had a bit of, I don't know, a Baden Black or something in it. It's a little bit darker white than I expected, but it's not very noticeable, and I don't think it was necessarily like a negative look. It just wasn't as creamy white. So because I had the white out, I thought I'd mix that in with the red and just go over the edges of the orb just to kind of give them a little bit of a highlight, because the orb itself is ribbed. At this point I was fed up with the orb 3-prong holder thing that I had painted in the Mr. Hobby bright greens. I decided to go over it with the Warp Stone Glow. It definitely kind of took a little bit of the shine out and just made the colors a little bit more consistent. And then the beginner's best friend is just cover everything in Nuln Oil. So with this I went over pretty much all of the silver aspects with it, as well as I did go over some of the copper and the staff, as well as the metallic blue-green orbs to try and kind of darken some of those glyphs and sigils on it so that they're more visually noticeable. I just used a big thick brush for this, and then the Nuln Oil just went into all the recesses and gave it that depth and shadow. And then the next step was just to get Mephiston Red again, and I used some dry brushing. I got this makeup brush that I had stolen from my wife that I use for dry brushing, and I just applied a bit of red into the armor where the orb glowing would reflect naturally. It's a very subtle look, but I think it helps kind of elevate the model to make it feel like it's really this energy orb that's glowing because it has the reflection. So this is the finished product. I'm super happy with how it turned out. I might do a separate video about the base because I did some different techniques. I really like the metallic blue-green paint on it. I think it really stands out, and having a Necron with any Mephiston Red like this is also super awesome. I'd be really interested in hearing what your thoughts are, so if you've made it this far, please consider leaving a like or a comment, or a subscribe really helps out the channel. I was able to actually take this unit and play it on the tabletop, and it was a lot of fun to use, so I'm glad that I went ahead and finished it, because it's been sitting around for a while. I've been distracted with my Leviathan box. I've only painted the Ripper Swarm so far, so I have a lot more to go on that. And also I did a video about how I managed to get the entire Royal Necron Court for just 20 Australian dollars, which is an unbelievable deal. So I have those that I need to paint as well, so I'm going to be very busy the next couple of weeks. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.